For more, we are joined by Dr. Heidi Hardt. She's an associate professor of political science at University of California, Irvine, and she's also the author of NATO's Lessons in Crisis. Dr. Hardt, first of all, just how significant a step forward is this decision by Turkey to back Sweden's bid to join NATO? And what's next?
This is a very substantial step forward. There's been a long time coming at this point, waiting for a signal from the president of Turkey to move forward and support Swedish membership. Back at last year's summit, which took place in Madrid, there was what seemed to be consensus at that point for moving forward on membership for both Sweden and Finland. And so since then, there has been a tripartite agreement that was signed among Finland, Sweden, and Turkey. Since that point, there's also been movement by both Finland and Sweden to follow up with those agreements. And so dropping of arms embargoes with Turkey, and Sweden really has made steps forward in a direction that Turkey has been happy with. We have suddenly seen a surprise request for moving forward and renewing conversations about Turkey's membership within the EU. Those discussions have been frozen since 2005, but it is a very big step to see the president remove that obstacle that we've seen. We still have to see some movement, though, from the parliaments of both Turkey and Hungary before we can actually see Sweden become a full member of NATO.
Yeah, still a few more steps to clear. Pushing it back against NATO's expansion is one of the main reasons President Putin gave for invading Ukraine in the first place. So what reaction should we expect from the Kremlin? And what does this do for Ukraine's outstanding membership plea?
I think at this point, given the inclusion of Finland into the alliance, we probably would have heard more from the Russian Federation at this point if there were going to be additional obstacles. But Putin has indicated that there should not be a backlash. At least we haven't seen any yet against Sweden and Finland joining. That said, this is someone who, of course, is in charge of a country that is actively at war with what was and continues to be a sovereign state. So we should take a very large grain of salt to any promises that are being made. But that said, we have not seen that backlash yet. So fingers crossed.
And Doctor, we're seeing some division in NATO, quite a pushback to the U.S.'s decision to supply Ukraine with cluster munitions. Do you think that this is the right decision by Washington? And is there any fallout of that decision that we should look out for or be concerned about, that is?
I think it's important to recognize why this is such a controversial decision. 123 countries signed a convention saying that those countries would not use this particular weapon, cluster munitions, because we know that they can harm children, they can harm non-combatants, civilians. And so it is a discussion that has been ongoing within the Biden administration. Presumably what we should expect to see at the summit is some discussions, especially on the part of the U.S. with allies to try to get them to understand the difficult decision that was made. That said, I think it's important to recognize that the use of this particular form of weapon will likely have some very serious consequences for civilians, which is a difficult decision, as we can imagine, for the Biden administration to make, given that at the same time, the U.S. was looking at the intelligence and recognizing that Ukraine was really short on artillery.
Speaking of Ukraine, what will President Zelensky want to see coming out of this NATO's leaders meeting?
I think probably a lot of things. One thing for certain is some more information on, if not a timeline, some indication of what might be happening with Ukraine's path to membership. That said, I think President Biden's recent announcement that's just happened, indicating that that Ukraine is not going to be admitted into NATO anytime soon, as long as Ukraine is at war, makes things quite tense in that particularly respect. At the same time, the U.S. continues to be the number one contributor in terms of aid to Ukraine, and so I imagine that President Zelensky is hoping to continue to see the unilateral, not unilateral, but the individual level support from many of the NATO allies that has continued to be given. At this point, there's more than 112 billion US dollars that have been provided by individual NATO allies, as well as EU allies. Many of those, EU member states. Many of those EU member states also being NATO states. So we do continue to see very strong support from many of the allies and many European member states for Ukraine, which I'm sure is something that President Zelensky wants to make sure continues.
Dr. Hardt, those representing Asian nations will be there as well, namely the Indo-Pacific partners, some of whom have expressed concerns about what's happening in Europe today could happen in Asia tomorrow. So what will they be looking out for?
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that there's a global concern. Many countries around the world, in different regions of the world, are very concerned about what the precedent is that may be set if Ukraine is not successful in winning this war. The international order is ultimately based on the norm of non-intervention, the recognition of territorial integrity of individual states. And this was a case of an unprovoked invasion of another sovereign state. So I think there are a lot of legitimate concerns that are being raised. That said, it's also important to recognize that NATO's Indo-Pacific partners, so Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, these are all states that have been very strong supporters of Ukraine. Were very quick to condemn the invasion of Ukraine, and are not just interested in supporting Ukraine, but also have other reasons to be interacting in a closer partnership with NATO. So everything from maritime security concerns, climate threats, cybersecurity, space as a new domain. You could think about concerns that they have related to new emerging technologies that are coming out, and what does that mean when we think about artificial intelligence, particularly in the backdrop of a country like the PRC, who is really getting quite advanced, as many other large countries are on some of these technologies, and what does that mean for their ability to defend their own countries and territorial integrity?
Yeah, certainly are many talking points from this NATO Leaders Summit. Thank you for helping us understand what's at stake here. Dr. Heidi Hardt, there, Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of California, Irvine.